Welcome to Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance, where we uncover the powerful truth about your beginnings and how they've shaped your entire life. I'm Shannon O'Flaherty, and in this show, we are not just exploring your birth, we are dismantling the chains of generational trauma. We're diving into the core of who you are, peeling back layers of inherited beliefs and behaviors that have held you back for far too long. This isn't just about understanding your past. It is about reclaiming your future. Get ready to break free. This is Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance, and your transformation starts now. Hi, welcome to Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance. I'm Shannon O'Flaherty, and thank you for joining me on this amazing episode. Today's show, my wonderful guest, Kathryn McCullough, shares her personal story of being born into trauma, having parents who needed to keep secrets, and having to define the line between love and liability. Kathryn McCullough is an essayist, artist, and expat who co-founded Idiom Art, a creative center in Cuenca, Ecuador, where she is now an artist in residence. Trained as a Miltonist, she holds an MA in English Literature and won the annual Teaching Award for her work in the University of Kentucky Writing Program. She was a poetry editor at Nimrod, received NEH funding to do research at the Center for Renaissance Studies, the Newberry Library, and earned a fellowship to the Shakespeare Institute, the academic arm of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. Kathryn believes that participating in the creative process is a redemptive act, that it allows artists to find meaning in happenstance and live with resonance and urgency. Because stories heal, they reinforce everything from friendship to family. They build community, and in doing so can transcend difference and broker reconciliation. Kathryn is writing a coming-of-age memoir. Since her father was a bookie for the mob and her mother an ardent evangelical, her story speaks to the current marriage of criminal and Christian cultures in the U.S. A narrative about family, it explores the epic potential for right and wrong in each of us, how anyone can grow and how everyone can hope. Her memoir lays out the odds, which Kathryn insists favor the future. Kathryn, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here with me today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here as well. It's great to see you today.
It's great to see you too. And isn't modern technology wonderful? All the way from Ecuador to the UK, being
I know.
aired in, I don't know where, somewhere in the northwest of the States.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm really, really excited.
Thank you. And it is really empowering to share our personal stories with each other. And that's what we like to do here on Transformation Talk Radio and on my show, Beyond Birth Trauma, because all of our stuff, how we've ended up as the adults that we've become, all points back to that early birth imprint and how we go through life, and with those kind of suppressed belief systems or trauma that gets caught in our cells. So, Kathy, we know just a tad about your adult story, but can we start, please, at the beginning with your birth?
Certainly. I was born a premature identical twin. My mother developed toxemia and her labor was induced a month prematurely. And I was born, and after I was born, the doctors didn't know that we were twins, obviously, back in 1962. So they said, "Oh, we think maybe there's another baby in there." And then my twin sister was born. The doctors said that neither of us would survive because we were too small and our lungs were too underdeveloped. We were put in incubators. We were separated from one another. Unfortunately, my sister died 2 days after we were born. And somehow I survived,
Wow. I
which
mean,
is sort of the story of my life. I
yeah.
survived.
I mean, yeah, you are a survivor for sure. And I mean, it's really interesting right there. And that's really her birth story, isn't the main story of this episode, but that could be an episode all in itself because if you're born, first of all, if your mother has any complications during pregnancy, she's going to be in a high state of anxiety. Like, giving birth, you got to focus, right? A lot's going on. So
Right.
as the baby, you'd pick up that anxiety, that stress. And then to be born with dysfunctional lungs, so you're not able to breathe the joy of life, to breathe the air of joy. This is a lot of people breathe shallowly in their whole adult life. This was pointed out to me when I was 25. I was also stuffed in an incubator my first few days. And so our lungs, it is how we breathe in life force energy. And then
Right.
losing your twin sister, I mean, that just sets up all sorts of abandonment and loss. Um, and yeah, continue, please.
Absolutely. Well, when we were born, no one touched me for the first month of my life. So I was in an incubator. Um, this caused, I think, a lack of bonding with my mother,
Mhm,
perhaps.
mhm.
Um, there was struggle between us for decades, and I think that it originated in this birth trauma and the fact that she wasn't even able to touch me for the first month of my life. Um, so my father was very, very excited when we were born. He drove around Pittsburgh, shouting, "My wife had twins! My wife had twins!" Um, but my dad was always very optimistic. So I that's how it all got started.
Wow. I mean, if you're not held, I mean, they've scientifically proven how important it is that skin to skin contact when a baby is born needs to be on the mother. And
Right,
I wasn't held or probably touched for the first couple of days of my life. Couple of days, that's one thing. But a month, I mean, that will sever that connection with your mother before it's even formed. And what that
right,
sets up is then this walking on eggshells thing. Not perhaps it manifests differently with different people, but not feeling safe, not feeling held, maybe extreme sensitivity to the cold, which is how it's manifested for me. I mean, it could be having a father born in the tropics. I have his tropical blood. I don't know. But, it could form or manifest in a variety of different ways for any person who's being put in an incubator right off the bat.
right.
So tell us what happened then with your mother. So your father, the big personality, he's shouting to the world. And then what happened with your mother in terms of that lack of bonding process? How did that manifest for you?
Um, mm, I don't know exactly. I just know that my mother, she acted disconnected from all of us. And I don't know if I'm the oldest of four, so I don't know if my other siblings felt disconnected from her or not, but I suspect at least one of my sisters did.
Mhm.
Um, but when I was very young, up until the age of 6 or 7, I seemed fairly normal. I was an exuberant, excited, creative, fairly bright kid, and I loved life. Um, but when I was 8 years old, because my father was a bookie for the mob, the FBI raided our house um, in November of 1970. I guess that would make me, yeah, 8 years old. So what happened was that in Pennsylvania, Dick Thornburg discovered, who was the attorney for Western Pennsylvania And then the governor of Pennsylvania uh, learned that the mafia was paying off local police departments to look to, to not notice what they were doing. And the primary way the mob was making money in Western Pennsylvania was through illegal gambling. And so Dick Thornburg decided that a court, and this is all in his autobiography called Where the Evidence Leads. Um,
So did your
yes,
did your mother know that your father was a bookie for the mob
uh,
at
great
this time?
question. Yes, my mother did no, my mother did not know originally. She was completely in the dark. And she discovered this shortly after they were married. If I don't know the exact time, but I suspect it was before or shortly after I was born.
And so
Um,
because
yes,
of the lack of connection with your mother, and you have three more siblings, yes?
yes,
Uh, who lived. We're not including your
yes,
sister.
correct, correct. There were
Okay.
five if we count my twin.
Right. Okay. And so, in terms, I'm just backtracking a little bit,
Okay,
in terms of attachment, right? Because we have both parents, and the first attachment is with the mother. So,
right.
how did that kind of work for you? Was she already religious?
Yes, my mother became very, very um, evangelical um, after discovering what my father did for a living. There
Right.
would seem to have been a correlation between the two. I'm not sure, but I think she saw Christianity as Christianity advertises itself to be as a means of redemption. And so it helped her to cope with what she was facing. The problem was that it affected my relationship with her in as far as I wanted to please her. And the
Yes.
only way to please my mother was to be either perfect or to be as much like my mother as I possibly could. But my mother's message to me and to all of my siblings was that we were born into sin, that we were evil, which is sort of, I guess, the Christian message that the human race is fallen and it needs to be redeemed. So there was this ongoing, constant message about my uh, having being born and being sinful.
Wow.
Even
I
though
mean,
I was 3 or 4 years old.
yeah, you're growing up being told you're not good enough, basically, right? Your whole
Exactly.
life you're hearing that. That's really, really sad. Um, and then you had talked about if you kids had misbehaved.
Oh, yes. My mother was quite the disciplinarian. She believed in paddling her children if we did anything that she perceived to be disobedient. Um, and what she did was she kept her sorority paddle on the top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. And if we did something wrong and we needed to be paddled in her eyes, she would send us to the kitchen to retrieve the paddle so that in some ways it was almost like we were participating in our own discipline.
Wow.
Like we had to buy into the whole process, which was really shaming
Yeah.
and damaging.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really mixed messages because you're in trouble, you're about to get paddled, but you also still want to please the mother. So there's all
Yes.
sorts of underlying things going on here. I mean, can you all see why? And maybe your family wasn't quite as dramatic, but from the smallest of things, the way we as children are perceiving our parents' stuff is how it manifests in us at some level, either huge or either small. And so, did your father ever discipline you as well?
Only one time. And when I was 3, I stole a t-shirt from the neighbor's clothesline. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but it was my first illegal act. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that I was stealing. I didn't even understand the concept of stealing. But yes, my mother found out, marched me into my father, and insisted that my father just paddle me. And he did very lightly. He swatted me on the bottom a couple of times. And that was the one and only time he ever disciplined me.
It's really
So,
interesting. I mean, it was a different time back then because nowadays, you don't ever hit your kids, right? But yeah,
right,
we got spankings, which probably weren't like really hard or anything, but it was just the humiliation of it and the upsetting the parents of it. I mean, I remember just when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember stealing. I think I was probably 5 or 6, and I stole some glass animals from, I don't know, the kid of the parents that my parents were visiting. And my mother found them, of course, and I was in big trouble. And she made me write a letter, an apology letter, and own up to it. And I remember feeling really humiliated and shamed then too. But of course, that is how kids learn right and wrong. And I,
right.
and then I think the first time I ever had to go to confession, she saw me with a lit mat. Okay, I was 6. This was probably stupid, but I was very much in control. I was 6 with a lit match on a shag pile rug, dropping the
Oh
match.
my goodness.
Yeah, I still play with fire, right? And stepping on it because I knew I could put it out before it would catch the whole house on fire anyway. She saw that and she said, I'm going to tell your father, like, oh God, don't tell my dad, whatever you do. It wasn't because I was afraid of him, it's because I didn't want him to be upset with me. Or
Right,
you're going to go to confession and, tell your sins to God. So it's very interesting, the power of the telling of the father kind of thing.
right.
Um, okay, I just wanted to touch on that before we get into
Yes, that's important. That's really important.
yeah, before we get into the father part because of what's coming later in your story, yeah?
Yes.
Um, okay, so talk about fathers, your father's father and your mother's parents. Let's do it
Okay.
in order like that, and then we'll come back to your father being in the mob and all of that because
Okay.
I think having an understanding of the background and what's going on at this other kind of quiet, invisible level is important to see.
Yes, the issues are generational.
Yes,
And they reach back in time and they can extend forward into the future.
yes.
Um, my father was born into my grandmother and grandfather were divorced when my father was 3 or 4 years old. So my father never really knew his father. Um, my grandfather was a columnist for in Pittsburgh. He was a journalist, and my grandmother came from a wealthy um, family, and so that translated into my father growing up with being chauffeured around the city. If he wanted to go to a movie with his friends, they would be driven by the chauffeur.
Mhm.
So my father grew up with a lot of privilege, and the expectation that privilege was perhaps owed him. I don't know if he felt that way, but perhaps he did. Um,
I think when you grow up with privilege, if especially if you have nothing else to model it from, and he didn't have a strong male role model to model after, that it can turn into a sense of entitlement because what else do you know, right? I mean,
right.
kids only know what they're
They
given,
only know
right?
what they know,
Hmm.
only know what they're exposed to. Yes, absolutely. Um, so my mother came from a very middle class family who lived about 60 miles east of Pittsburgh. My grandfather was a owned a lumber company. He was the postmaster for for the town. My grandmother chaired the county Republican Party, and um, and so my mother came from a very different kind of background than my father.
Were they
Um,
religious too? Hurt your mother's parents? Was
at
she
that,
raised?
when my mother was growing up, I don't think they were.
Huh.
No. No, I mean, they were, presume that they went to church, but there was nothing radical about what they believed,
Hmm.
remotely radical,
Hmm.
until after, until later, many years later, after I was born.
Hmm.
So,
And so your mother's parents, her dad also died when she was young.
yes, my mother's father died when my mother was 11, and he died of a heart attack driving on the road from their summer home back into town. They spent every summer on they had a home in the country, and every day my grandfather would drive back and forth to town to work. And one day he had a heart attack and was killed instantaneously in this on this drive. So my mother so my grandmother had to assume my grandfather's responsibility running the lumber company, and my mother had to begin taking care of her younger sister, who was 5 years younger than she, or 5 or 6 years younger.
Wow.
So that was really traumatic for my mother because she was very, very close to my grandfather. She claimed that she was his favorite, and she adored him. She idolized him.
So that's also really interesting, following on. So your father didn't have a strong male role model. Your mother pedestalized the one strong male role model she had, but then he left. He
Right.
died. It's like
Yeah.
abandonment. And then your mother had to grow up really quickly because she had to take care of her younger sibling. And
Right.
when a child has to grow up too fast, it really creates a lot of deeper issues because all of us need to be kids. We need to have a childhood. And there's a lot of people who never have. So that sense of being free, being playful, enjoying life like kids are supposed to do, or the kids who have had severe abuse in their younger years also didn't get to have a proper childhood. This all goes into all of the stuff that holds us back later on in life. Um, so her father, she said she was his favorite, but he was also not very nice to her siblings. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, he was a strong disciplinarian, and her older sisters, three older sisters, um, all had conflict with him. So yes, he was a strong disciplinarian, and the problems seemed to develop after each of the girls became an adolescent. My grandfather died before my mother became an adolescent, so she sort of retained that um, idealized image of her father.
Mm-hmm.
And she really did have an idyllic childhood before her father died. Um, she grew up in a small town. It was involved in gymnastics and dance. She had a horse. It was things were very she wasn't privileged like my father was, but she was very comfortable and had a fairly carefree childhood. And then that was severed when she was
Mm-hmm.
11 and her father died. And that was, I'm sure, a huge loss for her and traumatic for her.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and also if if your parent is abusing your siblings, it
Yeah.
creates guilt in you for all, even though you're relieved that you're surviving and not being abused, you feel guilty because you're a little bit out of control over who is being abused. It's the same kind of setup as the people who go to war when all of their people in the same troop die and they live. They feel guilty for living.
Survivor
And
guilt.
survivor guilt. It's the same kind of thing, even though they haven't died, but it's a similar kind of thing. And so your mother then was always searching for this idyllic man.
Exactly. Exactly. And when my mother went to college, she studied education. And she was engaged two times before she was engaged to my father. She was
And
sort
how
of a
did
serial engager or engagee, however, whatever's the correct form.
how
Um,
did your dad and your mom meet then?
my father and mother met in Pittsburgh. When my mother graduated from college, she went to Pittsburgh to teach kindergarten in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Fox Chapel. And she and her roommates went out one evening, and my father was tending bar at a local establishment, and they met him. And it was not a common for young women to go into those kinds of establishments alone at that time.
Hmm.
But I imagine, and I don't know exactly how it happened, I imagine that they were forced into this establishment by a thunderstorm. I don't know what, but however it occurred, these three girls met my father, and he gave them, he asked for their phone number to their apartment, and they gave it to him. And he began calling, and and supposedly he would talk to whichever of the three answered the phone. But eventually he began asking only for my mother. But my mother refused to go out with him because she was already engaged. Um, but my father could be persuasive and persistent. And he persuaded her to go out. And eventually, it wasn't supposed to be an actual date, but she agreed to go. And he took her to a restaurant in Pittsburgh. I believe it was the Park Shenley. And he told her, he sat back in his chair after dinner, and he smoked Pall Malls, and said, "I'm going to marry you, Judy Kunkel." And she said, "Yeah, right, Tice." Um, and and within several months, they were indeed engaged.
Wow.
So
And she did not know. Was your father already involved with the mob at this point? Do
he
you know?
must have been, because uh, I can only answer that by knowing about the wedding, my parents' wedding photos, and the person who became um, who is supposedly now the underboss of what remains of the Pittsburgh crime family, is photographed as being part of the wedding party.
Wow.
So my my father had that connection when my parents were married. Now, I don't know the degree to which he was involved in illegal gambling at that point. I suspect he probably was. But
Okay.
that connection was already existed.
Okay. So now let's go into what happened with your father and all of the mob stuff and where were you in all of this?
I didn't really know anything about this until I was 8 years old in 1970. At that point, the the FBI really had their sights on taking down the mob, and in Western Pennsylvania, this involved um, illegal gambling. And Dick Thornburg believed that the illegal gambling was the mafia's cash register, he called
Dick,
it.
Dick Thornburg was who again
He
for
was the district attorney for Western Pennsylvania, for the
okay.
Western District of Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And then he went on to become the governor of Pennsylvania and then eventually the attorney general for Reagan and for Bush number one. But he made a name for himself by taking down illegal gambling in Western Pennsylvania. And the leader of that illegal gambling operation in Western Pennsylvania was the same man who's photographed in my parents' wedding photo. And so in 1970, the RICO laws had been passed. If you know anything about legal history in the US, that's probably not really important, but this was something that the US government was really pursuing. And so the FBI in 1970, November, raided 23 locations across Western Pennsylvania using about 100 FBI agents.
Oh,
And two of the places that they went were the house where I was, my home, and the place where my father happened to be that day, which was locked in a secret room with that man who was the head of it all.
your
They,
father was like
my
hiding out essentially.
he was in this person who I don't think I'll name here because he's still alive. Um,
Say
that
anything you don't
person
want to say.
that person had built a cement block room in their basement so that they could be on telephones there, and if there were a raid by the government, it would be hard for the FBI to access them. And my father was in that room with that man
Wow.
when the FBI raided that day. And the primary place they were seeking to uncover evidence was where my father was, because that man was the sort of head of it all.
Hmm.
But simultaneously, there was a raid at my home. My father wasn't home, but it was scary. It was very,
Were
very
you
scary.
you were 8 years old
I
then
was
when
8 years old. Yes,
do you
yes.
remember what happened that
I
day?
don't remember the early part of the raid. What I know about it, I learned from my father's FBI file.
Mm.
But what my primary memory of that day is that I guess I had been sent to my room. And I remember my father coming in and reassuring me that everything was going to be okay. And and I remember being afraid that my dad was going to go to jail. So
So
that's my recollection of that day.
you thought so at 8 years old you realized that your father was doing something wrong,
Illegal. Yeah,
illegal,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay. So I mean, imagine the fear of that, right? So because
yeah.
kids Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so keep going. It's a fascinating story.
So what happened was the trial of all of these 23 people who were indicted in Western Pennsylvania, 23-ish, was in 1972. And my father refused, the government wanted my father to testify against the leader of this organization, whom everybody will call him Bobby I, which is what he
Okay.
referred to himself as.
Okay.
And my father refused. And the Department of Justice threatened to jail him if he did not. So eventually he was persuaded to cooperate. And in his mind, from what my mother told me, he was willing to he cooperated, but not happily and not fully, and told the truth, but not always straightforwardly.
Yeah.
So that trial happened when I was 10 years old.
And do you remember
And
that?
I do not remember the trial. No, I do not remember that at all. Um, but I remember that about a year after that, my father had a heart attack or a near heart attack. He had to have open heart surgery, had to have bypass surgery.
Wow.
So, and the doctors told him that it was stress from this work that he was doing, and that he needed to stop. And at first, my father attempted to do that, but it didn't last. It
I
didn't
think
last.
once you're in a crime family, I don't think there is an exit ramp, is there?
No, there
I
isn't.
don't
There
know.
isn't. There
I mean,
really
I've watched The
isn't.
Godfather, so as far as that's concerned, there's no exit ramp. So,
Interestingly, that's a movie I've never watched.
oh, that's interesting. So, were there more? What happened after that? So he kept working, and were there
What
more?
what happened was that everybody was sent off to federal prison in eastern Pennsylvania to oh gosh, what was it called? It was sort of Club Med,
Hmm.
Club and Club, or they called it Club Fed also. But these people went to the same prison where the Watergate folks were sent, and they
Oh,
were there at the same time at this sort of low security federal institution.
right.
And so my father was left to sort of run it all because they were all imprisoned. So, and things went fairly well until I was about 15 or so, I'd say. I think I was about 15. And at that point, it was my sister's 13th birthday. It was in February, very cold winter day. And after we celebrated my sister's birthday, my dad wanted to go out for ice cream because it wasn't cold enough already. And
Yeah.
And as we were going down our front steps to the street to get into my father's Cadillac, um, a car raced up the street and three federal agents jumped out. And we knew we had experienced this raid before. We knew what happened when there was a federal raid. We knew what was going on. So my mother and my siblings and all raced back up toward the house. And my mother put her purse on top of the bedding sheets that my father had left on the stairway. My father had had a door whose the top of which was hollowed out and lined with tin, so that he could fold the papers where he wrote down the his client's bets into three or threes, and then put it inside this compartment in the top of the door. And
Mhm.
before we left that evening, my mother said, Tice, be sure you put those papers in the door. And my dad said, oh, forget it. Don't worry. And he put them on the step inside the house. And when we rushed into the house, that's when my mother put her purse on top of those papers. I don't know.
Protecting him. Yeah.
Probably that's my perception of it. Because what happened was then the federal agents accused my mother of trying to cover up what my father was doing. Whether that was her motivation or not, I don't know, but I suspect it probably was. And so what I remember about that was uh, they're accusing my mother of this and threatening to arrest her. And the next thing I remember is I heard somebody screaming, "Don't you dare take my mother." And it seemed really far away at first, and then it seemed closer and closer until I realized I was the one who was doing the screaming. "Don't
Wow.
you dare try to take my mother."
Got
And
chills.
that's all I remember. It's all I remember about that raid.
Wow. I mean, how
So
terrifying. So did they arrest your father then?
actually, yes, they must have. They must have. Yeah, and when they raid your home, they tear it apart.
Mhm.
They sort of throw everything everywhere looking for whatever it is they're looking for. And
They did not take your mother then.
no, they did not. I must have been really persuasive.
So how did that affect you then? Because this would create a lot of paranoia, a lot of fear, a lot of mistrust in your parents, in yourself, with everybody around you at 15.
What happened was I was very confused because my mother had this. My parents were not well suited. I mean, they did not match up well. My father was a criminal, my mother was an evangelical Christian, and my mother had a very strong evangelical Christian worldview. And my loyalty in terms of my belief system was with my mother. Not that I ever would have overtly said my father was doing anything wrong, because he was sort of my hero. So I had him as my hero on one hand, and my mother telling me on the other hand that I was wrong and sinful. And so that created a lot of cognitive dissonance for me. It created confusion.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think I grew up really struggling to figure out who I was um, in this sort of ongoing tension between right and wrong, or what was seemingly right and what was seemingly wrong. Um, and what I ultimately learned was what appears to be wrong or evil is not always what it appears to be.
Mhm.
And the person who claims to be religious and holy and godly and so on, is not always exactly that. And so I struggled to figure out who I was and where that line was between right and wrong. And I when my mother, I always think that my mother, in that instance, when she put her purse on top of my father's papers, she was facing this conflict between love and liability. She loved my father. She really, really did. And I believe that, and all of my siblings believe that. We have no reason to believe she didn't.
Mhm.
And and so she faced liability in that instance by seemingly trying to protect him. And so I grew up with this confusion. And what happened was that, well, there was actually one other raid that happened when I was 17. Shall we go there next, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that, this this point of love and liability, I mean, it's a fascinating subject because, okay, in some cases, liability can be extreme. It could mean prison, right? But how when we love someone, how we give up our power to support that person in whatever way it is, right? And
Yes,
without even thinking of the consequences many times, or
right,
whatever we're giving up our power to. That's one of my recent blogs, because sometimes it can be fear, it can be overwhelm, it can be panic, right? It can be all
right.
sorts of things that we give up our power to. So, even to our own values about love, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yes, what happened at the next raid when you were 17?
Yeah, I was 16 or 17, and my parents had a condominium on the beach in Florida, in Bal Harbor, Florida, which is North Miami Beach. And my siblings and my parents were there. It was in the winter, probably February again. And I went, but came home early because I was a very serious student and I thought I needed to go to school and study. I was overly responsible. And one day I came home from school. My grandmother we lived in a duplex. We lived on the second floor. My grandmother lived on the first floor. I came home from school and my grandmother stopped me as I was coming in the front door and said, "You need to call your father." And I said, "Okay." So went upstairs, I got on the phone, I called my parents in Miami, and my mother answered the phone. My mother gave the phone to my father, and my dad told me that we had a visit that day from the FBI, and that I should expect that it would be on the evening news,
Right.
which was, you know, at 16 or 17, the last thing you want is your father to be on the evening news, uh,
No, you really don't
as
want that
indicted by the
publicity.
FBI. And the
Mm,
thing was that my grandmother, in that situation, she called my father in Miami. She said, "He's not here right now. He's in Florida." And she got on the phone and called my parents. And my father wasn't home, but she did get the FBI on the phone with his attorney, and they agreed that my father would turn himself in the next day at the FBI field office in South Florida, in Miami. And but I learned from my father's FBI file again that he was declared a fugitive. Because in this FBI file, I see all of the urgent notices that were sent out that this man was a fugitive. Even though they knew where he was and that he had agreed to turn himself in, he just happened not to be home that day. Um, and I presume that that's what part of what was on the evening news that night, that he was a fugitive. I don't remember that, but I get that impression from what the information I gleaned from that FBI
mhm,
file.
mhm.
So
So what happened? What happened next? What happened? Your dad died.
my father was acquitted in that instance,
Okay.
um, after that trial. But yes, my father died when I was 19 of massive heart attack. And my mother moved my siblings and I from Pittsburgh to Kentucky, where her sister and brother-in-law lived. And my uncle was a evangelical Christian charismatic minister, preacher, whatever you want to call it. And so I went from this world of organized crime into this world of extreme, oh, sorry, I hit my camera, extreme religiosity. I mean,
Oh,
complete and utter religiosity. And in fact, I lived with my aunt and uncle after my father died. So I was in the home where it was like jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
Wow.
because my uncle believed that women should submit to men and that, there was this hierarchical submission structure within the church where there should be. And so, like one time he made me go out with a guy who asked me out from the church, even though I wanted to have nothing to do with this guy.
Mhm.
But he said, no, you have to go out with him. So that's who my uncle was. And I think, now that my uncle is older, I think he probably meant well. I don't think he was ever malintended,
No.
but sure, it sure had a deleterious effect on me and on other people. So, yeah, and I went to school at the University of Kentucky where I studied English literature. And I believe that part of my education is what freed me. I was not free for many years,
Mhm.
but my initial ability to break free, at least from that church structure, came from, I think, my ability to think critically and learning to analyze literary texts.
Mhm.
Um, I was a very serious student, and I was fascinated by this whole notion of literary criticism. And because I learned to analyze texts and literary documents, I was ultimately able to begin thinking of the Bible as a literary text.
Right.
And I was able to begin seeing it differently than how I had been taught. When I was taught that it was the word of God, that,
Yeah.
almost like God dictated it. And, that I think is
Yeah.
what began to free me.
And so, did your dad ever take you with him when he was?
Yes, yes. Oh, I forgot to tell this part of the story. When my father died, he was owed a lot of money by a number of his clients. And my mother needed this money in order to move us to Kentucky and buy a house. And so I volunteered to take my mother out to collect, which meant that because I had gone with my father to collect, my dad had these special times with each of us kids where we would get to go with him on this collection process. But what it involved was a special lunch out with my dad, getting to choose what we wanted on the menu and having a Shirley Temple to drink. um, so then I took my mother that day after my father died to collect all of this cash from the people who owed him money, not even realizing that I was 19 years old. I was committing a felony, and I just didn't even occur to me. And really, that was my own intersection, where the intersection of love and liability um, came together for me, because I loved my father. I was loyal to my mother, and in that blind loyalty, I automatically agreed to take my mother to collect all this money, which
Wow.
was surely a crime. So,
Wow. Well, your story is so fascinating. We could stay and talk, I'm sure, for another whole hour about this. But what I'd really love to do is give everybody a little bit of a healing right now, down a little few downloads if you're ready to receive, because when you have all of that shock and trauma, it goes into your cells. So let's clear
yes,
some shock and trauma. If you're ready to receive, just hold your hands and say, I'm ready to receive. Keep your feet on the floor. And if you want to receive clearing of your shock and trauma, say yes.
yes,
And that you know what being in your power feels like,
yes,
that you know how to love and take care of your needs first,
yes,
and that you know how to leave your parents' health and happiness with them,
Yes,
and that we all have God's definition and understanding of trust.
absolutely.
Thank you. I think we have like maybe 30 seconds left. Kathryn, can you tell everybody if they could take away one idea from this conversation? What would you like them to take away?
The message is one of hope, that it doesn't, no matter what your circumstances were as a child or are as an adult, there is always hope for redemption, not in the Christian sense of redemption, but there is hope for recovery, for wholeness, for love, and for life. And that would be my message.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Kathryn. You've been an amazing guest. Fascinating story. What's the name of your book? Do you have a title yet?
Right, I have a title, working title, Kids Make the Best Bookies, though I sometimes think Odds might be a better title.
Well,
But
keep a lookout, everybody, for Kathryn McCullough's name. Where can people find you?
they
Do you
can
have
find me at KathrynMMcCullough.com. Um, and I'm sure you'll leave in the show notes where they can find me on Facebook and Instagram.
yeah.
And so,
Okay, that's great. Thank you. KathrynMcCullough.com, or you can find me on ShannonO'Flaherty.com or ShannonBTB.com. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you, Kathryn. It's been a
thank
great
you
honor to hear your
so
story.
much for having me.
Lots of love, everybody. Bye.
Thank
You have been listening to Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance with Shannon O'Flaherty on Transformation Talk Radio. On the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, we connect the dots between your ancestors, your birth, and the patterns that keep you stuck, guiding you to a place of profound healing and unstoppable brilliance. By examining and healing your cellular imprint from birth of how you perceive and respond to the world and the challenges that are created in your day-to-day life, we can begin to heal and live more balanced and fulfilling lives. For more information, visit ShannonBTB.com. That's ShannonBTB.com.